Okay, so this is video 3. In this particular one, we're going to be going into the Sculpt tools. So thus far, we've taken a look through some of these initial stages, the generators and the adjustments, which we can use to start off our beginning shape, something that we can take in, so just a regular primitive would be enough. You can, of course, also bring things in coming from other software, height map information that you've taken from, say, TerraGen or View or World Machine or maybe DEM files or whatnot. But one of the important things is to make sure that it comes across correctly. So if you've seen my video that covers the gamma and export features, you'll have an idea of what kind of things can happen in terms of importing and exporting data that is height map based, and how it can change the shape of what's here. So to ensure that we get the best possible export, I'm just going to right click and say mark for export there. Go to my build options. I'm going to make sure that I give it a unique name so that I know exactly what it is. It's very important to do. I'm going to turn that off, and I'm going to turn on the ignore vertical scale and make sure it's set to PNG. And then of course I choose the resolution that I prefer, 4096 or 2048, however you choose to do that. And then we go ahead and export that out. By making these changes, we're going to ensure that what comes into the Sculpt software, or the Sculpt version of the software rather, will look the same as what we have in the viewport here. So it's important to export it correctly, otherwise it can impact to a certain degree, the way the simulations work. You end up with steeper slopes and other things that can be somewhat a detriment to you. So this is what we want to do. I've already done that and exported it out, and so once you've done that, you can save your file and you're kind of good to go. We can exit out of that, open up again, and down here, just kind of hiding along with the create blank graph rather than creating the node graph that has the mount and displace and erosion node already. You can just create a completely blank one, and this one off to the side of it is actually going into the sculpting toolset. So if we click here, it's going to reload Gaea, but it's going to reload it in a sculpting interface. So the difference with a sculpting interface is that it wants a height map to start from, and I've done that. So you can see here as sort of a preview, I just made sure to test a few different methods of import and export from this, just to make sure that I was getting the shapes correct. And when I tried to do it without the ignore vertical scale, of course everything came out a little bit too short. So ignore vertical scale is this one. This was after sculpted and I saved it to a wrong format, but we'll fix that. So bring that in, and here we are. So it looks the same as what I had inside of Gaea to begin with. If we come up to the corner here, we have our 2D view. Just above that, where it says Erosion Studio, we have a variety of different options. We have recent images that we've loaded in the past if we want to reload and start again from them. We have recent projects if we've gone ahead and saved or incrementally saved them. These are .sculpt files, so they're not Tor files, they're Sculpt files that contain Sculpt data, which we can of course save and save out as. We can also open existing ones if we have one that we've been working on and want it to come back to. The re-import and reconstruct will go ahead and try and reload any height map that it's been based on, and then try and rebuild based on the different sculpting operations you've applied. So if you've updated or reprocessed it, maybe there was something wrong, maybe the gamma was incorrect or whatever, it'll take that back in and reprocess any of the starting point for your sculpt. The important one here is, of course, to export your terrain. Once you're done, you want to bring it back into Gaea or to another software. You want to export that height map. So export terrain, and my main advice, since it defaults to EXR, don't do that. You can use PNG, you can use TIFF, and I believe HDR works just fine. So those three provided decent results. Things like PSD and JPEG didn't load back into Gaea properly, so if you want to go back into Gaea, those aren't advisable. BMP, it's not 16-bit or even 32-bit, it's only 8-bit, so you get banding, which looks horrible. And then of course the EXR is stored incorrectly, and I don't think it even saw the raw, so we'll ignore that. So you can export that back out as a PNG, and if you set everything up for your export prior to this and saved, it should come back the same way. So the rest of the interface here is if we click and hold, so left mouse button, click and hold, we've got basic, soil, scratch, pockmarks, roughness. Actually, one other thing just before preferences, almost forgot. If you've changed this from the Alt left mouse to say just left mouse or right mouse or whatnot to make your life a little bit easier in the regular software, I get it. I often will change it myself. However, for sculpting exercises, when you want to go in and use sculpting, it's better to use the hotkey method, mainly because if you click and drag on the surface in the sculpt mode, it will start eroding that surface. It will start doing actions. So you have to click off the mesh to rotate around, which can be fine, but you have to be just careful ultimately. Another thing is you can set your build location. Even though I set this to PNG, it always defaults to EXR anyway, so it doesn't really matter. So I'm using the Alt navigation, and by using the Alt navigation, it ensures that I won't accidentally start doing stuff. So moving along, so we did this basic category, click and hold on the cutter, and we got cutter, flow lines, carver, carver 2, land breaker, and gullies, and of course things like wide flow 1, wide flow 2, and rough flow. We have the ability to store presets. We can create them, we can also import them if we want to share them. And what these are is if I click and hold, you'll notice that there's a little arrow off to the side, and there's presets for these things. And these presets are based on things like size, force, power, flow distance, and other things that are associated with that particular tool. We have our undo button, Control Z, pretty much the same sort of deal. And I'm going to stick with wide flow 1 right here. And in normal mode, if I go ahead and on myself, say right about there, and the wide flows are a little bit more expensive than some of the other regular erosion tools. They take a little bit longer to calculate. Not too long, but a little bit longer. This is a 2K mesh. And you can see what it's done here. It's heavily eroded that section, and it's dropped a whole bunch of soil here. Just going to Control Z that. And we're going to go with infinite flow. Infinite flow, the whole idea behind infinite flow is that rather than eroding, it's going to go ahead and apply deposit for you. So it's not going to actually carve away the rock like we did with normal. It's just going to provide the physical deposits going into each one of these little cavities in here, and then dumping a bunch at the base. So you can see that here, that there's no actual carving away of the rock, it's just dumping some sediment in these various crevices and leaving that behind. If we were to go to erosive and do that again, the same location, in this particular case it's not going to provide sediment, so there's no sediment of any kind or rocks and soil, but rather it's just going to carve away the surface. So if you just want to carve, no problem, it'll go ahead and do that for you. So there we have it. It's eaten away the surface, but there's no dump of sediment in that base. What this can be useful for is breaking up your sculpt into 2 different actions. One where you're primarily carving away, and then you can export a height map for that. And then a second where you're going in and you're applying soil on top of that. With those two different height map variants, you have your original, and then from the original you can do a difference to find the carved regions if you want to change any texture-based information or use masks to affect them further. And then of course, by then doing the deposits after that fact, you can then go ahead and export another time. So I'm just going to dump some additional sediment down in here, and that one can be a difference from the carved version. So then all we're left with is a mask for just the sediment, and we can use that to help color that region as well. So now it's just the sediment there. So it's very similar in its appearance because I was paying attention to the details of the surface when I was doing this, and we've got that sediment in roughly the same place we did when it's set to normal. So you can do both at the same time, or you can do either one. I did hear talk of, at a later point, there being a way of extracting these things as masks as this tool set evolves further. It's just not something that's quite available yet, but I imagine in the somewhat near future that will be something possible. So you just have to use the workaround, which is just exporting twice. Go through, do all your carving, export, then do all your sediment, export, and then we can do differences. So I'll show an example of that at the end of this video. Okay, so the next thing that we're going to look at from this one, and then we're going to move on to some other types, is the chaos that we can add to this. So if I go ahead and add chaos to this, you're going to notice a difference in its behavior. Just quickly undo that. So I'll go back to normal, because that's going to need to be in a carved mode as well. What it does is it scatters this erosion in multiple directions, and it does both the sediment and the actual carving in these different directions. So there we go. So you notice that with the initial one, it carved in one big long channel, but when you add some chaos to it, it starts spreading. Some of it's scattered down here, some of it went down here. And it's not overall as deep. There's a lot more scratchiness to this overall erosion. We have other things such as the power, which will, if you drop the power, it will speed up a little bit, but of course it won't do nearly as much. And then of course the force relating to that. And it's just tweaking these, trying it out and see how it looks. One of the things that you have to understand here is that this is, of course, erosion, and erosion happens based on certain features. Erosion typically provides some of the better results when you actually have sort of a detailed, noisy pattern. The smoother it is, the less likely it is for certain things to provide you with any usable changes in the mesh. It won't look quite right. So we need steep slopes, and we need variation to get something interesting. So I'm just going to undo that. I'm going to reset this just by right-clicking and clicking the Home button. That's going to set it back to what it was as default. If we look under here, we've got a rough flow, and you notice the rough flow by default has a larger setting. It's got a flow distance. There's no chaos or the other things. We just got the flows, the size, and the flow distance. So I'm just going to click on there, and it's fairly fast to calculate, this one, and we get these lines going all the way down. So the number of flows versus not a large number of flows. Let's move to the cutter. The cutter, will go ahead and click on there, and it's fairly quick, and it charges its way down, breaking and falling through the different crevices, and then dumping a nice smooth flow at the base. With this, we have an overall rock softness and a down cutting, which comes from the regular erosion toolset. So we'll be talking about those erosion tools in a later video. But rock softness, I think, is pretty straightforward, right? It's how inclined is it to really carve away that rock. And then, of course, the down cutting is just sort of enhancing those erosive lines, making it go a bit deeper. Then we have things like the size, which is always a sample radius for the brush. You know, the smaller the brush, the smaller the area that it works in. Our duration will increase with the slowness of the calculations, because it's doing it for a longer period of time, which means more attempts at eroding it. If you think about how real erosion essentially works, you have water pouring down on the surface and it's slowly eating away at the rock, carrying things with it with gravity. And this is a time process, so if you want longer erosion, you're going to have to take longer to produce it. And then we have an overall strength of that erosion, how intensely it attacks that surface, and you can change that. Switching on down, just clicking, left mouse button, clicking and holding, flow lines, bigger default area size. This is essentially like breaker, right? It goes in and it provides a series of cracks, but other than that, it doesn't do any kind of soil elements. So if I were to go, say, in infinite flow with this and then click, you're seeing that it's still carving away. It's not following that idea of sediment. If I go with erosive, it's again doing the same thing. So in this particular tool, because this tool has one specific behavior and only one behavior, it's not going to work with these things. Let's go with Carver. You see it's very small. We click on that and it does this sort of single channel path all the way down. We have, you know, flow distance, rivulets, you know, let's increase rivulets. Blech. Very important to make that noise. Makes everything work better. And it looks like it stopped itself there. Let's see, maybe here. There you go. And so the line is deeper and straighter overall. Just set that back to home. Do that again, roughly the same location, and it's a little bit faster, but not as deep. Flow distance, I imagine, is pretty straightforward. So we have Carver 2. It's a bit bigger, which means a few more lines, and they're kind of all overlapping, which gives us a bigger, deeper cut into the surface. We'll go with our land breaker. And you can see it's multiple lines of erosion, rocky sort of surface flow that's coming out, and sort of chunky. We'll go with gullies now. And you can see those flowing together. They're coming their way down, and then when they get to a point, they're basically meeting, and it just happens to be that this surface provides a very nice direct path. So just how it is, I guess. Here they don't tend to meet, they tend to separate a little bit more just because of the greater variety of directions that it can go. Down to the basic. Very basic erosion. So similar to one of the other ones we've already tried, where it erodes and sort of softens that rock and then provides that little flow. We've got a size, duration, and strength. There really isn't much in terms of control here. Moving on, soil. You can see little scratches in there. And for some of these things, you may find it better to go ahead and increase the power and or duration to see more of it. So if I went for a longer duration and did that, you're going to see a deeper impact of that. So that was soil. We'll go scratch marks. This thing looks big. and it's very bright. And so that's added little sort of scratch marks to the surface. You can kind of see them go away when I undo that. Let's take up the duration and the power so you can really see their impact. And now if I'm going to go press Control, if you're watching right there, Control Z, blink, you can see them go away. So it does a lot of tiny little channels. It adds small flow detail. And again, these are going to be based on details in the surface. So the types of detail in the surface will determine the response. Pockmarks is going to be much the same thing. So I'm going to take this up and this up so you can really see the results. So it's going to increase the amount of time that it does. And you can see what it's done here. So at the top right here we can see those patterns. So again, I'm going to undo that, Control Z, and you see it's gone in. And really what it's done is it's filled in a lot of these little areas with bits of sediment. So some scratches and lots of sediment in the deep pockets. Roughness. So if we undo that, you can see again going into that surface. Let's find a smoother region and see what that does. So not much there. Let's take that power all the way up. There's not a lot of details for it to play with, so there we go. So that's roughed it up. And that could be a good way of sort of priming a surface for one of the other erosion tools to really get it to start messing with that surface. So based on how smooth that was initially, maybe something else wasn't giving you enough detail, and by roughing it up, now it has more chances to sort of collide with different areas and create more interesting patterns. Okay, so the final thing that we're going to do in here is we're going to go ahead and do a mix between some carving, carving right there. So let's carve that. And we'll go ahead and export the train. So mountain carved, and then we'll go infinite flow, go the same area, dump a whole bunch of soil. There we go. Export terrain. Oh, this should have been PNG, oh no. Mountain carved and soil. That's okay. We can go ahead and just undo the soil portion. Thank goodness for undo, right? Make sure that's PNG. What the heck? Because the ending. This time paying attention to that ending, even though I've got it set here, and that should be good. And we're going to pop back over to regular Gaea. Okay, so here we are, I'm back, and one of the things that you do have to remember actually when going and exporting those maps, I forgot to mention, is that you do have to save before you export the map. So after you've done the carving, you have to save a version of the file, then export the terrain. Otherwise, it doesn't seem like it always exports correctly. And then doing your other one, do another save of the Sculpt file, and then go ahead and export again. So here we are. We're going to go through, and I'm going to grab these two, and I will do that, and we'll go through there, and I'll do that. That'll give me this. So this is the carve, this is the, let's label this, and I'm not going to call this one soiled because that's just weird. Dirt. And we're going to take these all the way up, like that, and we'll go difference. There we go. And we'll go all the way up, and we'll go difference. There we go. Excellent. So now with this, we've got, you know, that region and that region, which is kind of cool, and we want to do some masking for that. So first off, I'm going to go to some of the tools that we've been using in the previous video so that we make use of those, and we will go with a threshold here. Actually, let's just leave that for a moment. Rather than having to manually connect them, we'll just go ahead and drag and drop. That way Gaea will connect them for us. And we'll take that down. And we'll change that number to 1. Should give me all of that. And this one right here, change that also to a 1. I'm going to go ahead and take this and pin for color. We'll also mark it for export later on. This we will show as a mask. And this one we will show as a mask. Let's see if that works. This one's not quite set yet. So this one works fine at 0, and there we go. So we have our 2 masks, and what I'll do here is I'll get a mixer and another mixer, and we're going to go all multicolor on this. So what we want, I'm just going to go with some constants. Actually, I think I can get away without it. Go with some clutters. We'll get into these again later. I'm just going to quickly put this together so that we can see. And we will call this one, let's say, purple. To a darker purple there, so we can see that. And this one will go into a, let's say, a nice cyan range. A deeper blue. Try that again. I think I do need that. This one we're going to go with height all the way up. Just because I need some kind of input for my clutter. And we'll set you to a nice green color. Isn't it lovely? There we go. Okay, so we've got you and you. Set that to full. And if I plug you into the mask, that combines those together. Let's get these two together. And we'll do a max on that. And we'll plug that into the, oops. So I just have that little artifact because it tried to crash, but just connected them anyways. And since we're at the end of the video anyways, it doesn't really matter. So you can see what it's done here. We've got that purple showing up as the carved region, and then we've got the blue, which is the soil region, and the green, which is the rest of the terrain. So we can create these sort of different masks to isolate areas for texture purposes or do other things to them, and can combine them in different ways. So we'll look at more of those sort of ideas at a later point, but I just wanted to make sure that this concept was relatively clear, and now you have an idea of how to use the sculpting tools. So in the next video we'll go into the filters and talk about those and some uses for them.